Good afternoon to everybody that's joined this webinar. My name's Chris Lecluse. I'll be presenting, or one of the three co-presenters. We're just going to wait for a couple of minutes just to allow a few people who may have been held up to join us. In the interim, I'll just give a brief overview of what this slide is. So Teletrac Navman will be hosting the Intelligent Driver Safety webinar, Understanding Driving Behaviour with Video Telematics. Please note that audio will be by default switched off. The chat function on the toolbar is available to type in during the presentation. We will have a short presentation from the three of today's panelists. Should you have any questions, type them into the chat box and we will get to them during the Q&A section of the webinar at the end of the presentations. What have we got? We've got 3 minutes past. We'll give it another minute and then we'll launch into the presentation.
Let's change the chat to everyone. Ooh.
So I think we'll launch it now. Once again, welcome everybody to today's webinar. We have a panel of industry experts who we're talking about what makes you a great driver. Driving becomes a behaviour we do almost daily, going far beyond just being a skill. Understanding driver behaviour across the fleet is tricky to measure without the facts. I will be one of the panelists. I'm a solution specialist with Teletrac Navman. I have a background in law enforcement, having spent 20 years in the WA police force. Most of that time was in highway patrol, crash investigation, and time as a police driver training instructor. I have spent the last 10 to 15 years in and around telematics. So the combination of both a police background linked with the telematics hopefully gives me enables me to impart some of the knowledge from my background and how we use today's technology to address some of the issues we have with road trauma. We also have Gavin Hill, who's a General Manager of Strategy and Delivery from the Transport Certification Australia, or TCA. And Gavin is arguably the government's go-to person when dealing with using technology for the use of compliance. And of course, we have Jerome Carslake, a regular attendee to anything road safety. He's the NRSPP, the National Road Safety Partnership Program Director at the Monash University Accident Research Centre at Newark. So thank you all to my co-presenters. And once again, if you do have questions, please put them into the chat box. It's a very timely opportunity to discuss not only telematics, but videos. We know that technology continues to progress and videos or cameras are at the forefront of that. And between the three panelists, we're going to be able to articulate where we've been, where we are and where we're going with this technology. So I'll hand it across to Jerome to introduce yourself. Jerome.
Awesome, thank you very much for that, Chris. And it is always a pleasure to come together with yourself and Gavin to walk through this. So what I've sort of taken an approach is I'm quite a unique position. I get to chat with a lot of different organisations, people, and hear all these different sort of insights and thoughts, and then I can draw on the evidence and research from Monash University's side as well, and a lot of resources. So the goal here is I thought, look, as I dive in, I'm going to sow some seeds and then we'll sort of move on. And because I guess the key part's probably going to be diving into the discussion and some of the questions at the end. So if you go to the next slide, please, Chris. So here's a question to you all, and chuck into the chat or even just have a bit of a thought, but who do you think is the safest driver on the road statistically? Oh, look, I just thought I'd throw these in there and chuck into the chat and see what you sort of think. But when you sit there and you get out on the road, who are the people you think are the safest drivers out on the road. And why would that be? And this is probably the common sort of grouping that you might see out and about in there. Some of you might get your back up if you see maybe, I guess, the 71 plus at different sort of times, or those sort of group out there. But where do you think you'd be sort of sitting? And I'll then just quickly move on in the tick and sort of say, look, and if you didn't know, I'll just chuck it up now. Now that we've sowed that sort of seed. So the safest drivers out on the road are actually L-platers. And Chris, if you can go to that slide, click that please, mates. And the main reason being that they are the safest is because when they're in the car, they're in a learning mode. There's people sitting next to them, they're open, they're learning all this very complex sort of task. They've got people mentoring. It may actually be a bit different if it's their mum or dad teaching them at different sort of times, but quite often you have an expert or someone from outside that's mentoring and teaching them how to grow and how to become a safe driver. So at that point, they are the lowest risk driver out on the road. They're so self-aware, they're so cautious as what's going on, and they may make some mistakes here and there, and that's the common part of road safety, to recognize that. But the key thing is when they're on the road, I mean, people are probably very wary of them going around, giving them space, because we've all been there and done that, and always sort of recommend that. So just think about that. But then when you begin moving through these different sort of segments, the risk sort of varies quite a bit. And if you're thinking around, I guess, that 18 to 25, once you got off your L plates, you begin moving into the highest risk sort of demographic in particular, because look, they're learning everything new and they sort of know everything quite often as well. So next slide, please, Chris. So the big thing to sort of recognize in this sort of space, and this is, I think, where this sort of technology sort of approach comes in, is on average, how good is your driving? What do you think most people, the percentage of the population that thinks they're an amazing driver? And to Chris's point earlier, pretty much most people drive. And what you have is over 80% of people think they are better than average drivers out on the road. And that's what makes it really hard, because you do it every day. You're driving in and out or going around. You have all these thoughts like, I've never had a crash. I've never had a speeding fine. So I've got to be amazing. I've had everyone sort of sits there. I drive out and about. I think I'm pretty good. I've never had a crash. All these sort of elements flow through in their mind, which makes people think they're better than what they are. But in reality, because you're out in this sort of system, it doesn't necessarily mean that sort of fact. So if we go to the next sort of slide, drawing on this all together, I just want to sort of throw this slide out as regards to, I guess, a pilot we've been running. And what we've sort of been drawing on from this is this is a pilot that's been taking place. There's one in Victoria and there's one up in New South Wales. Looking at the 18 to 24-year-old, these are people from disadvantaged backgrounds. What we've done is I've drawn together all these different ideas and thoughts. We hear from people like Chris and industry around creating a best practice approach, where we've actually developed, I guess, an app, like a minimum viable product, where we're sort of engaging with these young drivers. And the goal is to reduce the risk and the driver of these young drivers while they're out on the road. So that what we do is we mentor, we take them along on sort of a journey, we touch base, there's a dashboard, there's all these sort of components. So it's all around helping them self-regulate and understand their safe driving in a vehicle that's been supplied by a fleet-based organisation. So this is where we give an afterlife for an ex-fleet vehicle. So we put them in a safer vehicle, and then we're growing them as the drivers. And you can sort of see where everyone would expect up at the very front end. And this is a mobile phone-based technology. So it's been designed to sit on their sort of phones when it sits in the vehicle. And then they can see their sort of speed, gives them all nudges and tips as it goes along. But we also have a regular mentor that checks in and gives them feedback and responds too. And there's a very clear consequence framework and all these sort of components we've developed and agreed with these young people out and about. But where things are quite different is you'll see here on the right, we've also gone through and got them to add in their emotional state in every one of these sort of trips. So when they're going on, how are they feeling? In shock, horror, if you're tired, if you're exhausted, those sort of components, your risk goes up significantly. And what we found with the data quite often is you can see there, if you're in an exhausted state, if you're grumpy, if you're stressed, those sort of things, you're far riskier sort of driver when you're out on the road. And the key thing we're sort of drawing here is it's trying to get people to understand by mentoring and growing them when they're out on the road, we can enhance their life satisfaction. And when you're happier in life, you actually take less risks. And what I mean by that is you have better meaning, you have better engagement, and you're getting pleasure in life. So you link that all together and you have a lower risk rider on the road. But the other key part is how we've gone about doing it. So when you sit there and you look at this sort of approach, what I've stepped through then is a whole list of different elements that sits within this sort of approach. And what I've sort of pointed out then was the clear goal that we wanted to accomplish with these young drivers is we wanted to make them self-aware and self-regulate themselves. So, and then sort of ease off over time. And so for every organization, you've got to think about what's the problem you're trying to solve. If you're jumping in and putting a technology in place or putting those sort of stuff, and then you're trying to find out where it fits, you're setting yourself up for a fail already. But the other part is when, with your goals, when you set it, what are your secondary ones that can come out of it as well? For example, if you're putting a telematics or those sort of systems in place, you can be in identifying, yes, you can help grow and build and coach a safer driver. But also, say you're working in the utility sector and these vehicles are running and parked up all the time, you begin looking at fuel savings and energy costs and those sort of things, and you can do claim back, which can help pay for the asset straight away. So if the vehicle's not traveling on the road, well, you shouldn't be paying fuel excise for that. The other part is really looking at the current and future needs. And as Chris pointed out earlier, this is a rapidly changing sector and marketplace. You look at some of the cameras coming in, two-way facing, all these sort of components. How are you going to use that? Where's the vehicle operating and what's the most fit for purpose opportunity for it as well? If you're operating out of regional areas, and some of the technology that's sit out there relies on being able to regularly update itself into the mobile net. There are utility companies, as an example, that actually have better mapping software for knowing where there is 4G, 3G sort of crossovers, or where there's no G in some places. And that makes some of the technology quite redundant if it's reliable and uploading information, if it never goes into these sort of areas. So it always comes down to how and where you're going to place this technology and how you're going to use it. And with anything that you go in, you can't just dive in and go, woohoo, here we go, here's this new technology we've put in place. You've got to really bring your workers along on the journey. It's pretty simple. In the NRSUP, we use a methodology called DAVE, where you decide, you declare you're going to look at it, you acknowledge these are the complexities, this is the vision we're going to look at, sorry, the vision we want to create, and this is how we're going to evaluate it. And you've got to bring your workers along, got to help them design the consequence framework, get them involved in them, find the champions, and very importantly, test it. You don't just jump on in and do it. Make sure you've got the right fit for purpose item in there that does what it says you're going to do, because there's a lot of people out there who are going to spruik. You can do all these amazing things when in reality it can't. So it's got to get right back to what's happening in the driver's seat when they're there. And the key part on this is the real-time monitoring and feedback. I think I can use as an example, and Chris, you might have a thought on this as well. If someone gets a speeding camera fine, they pick it up and then it doesn't arrive in the mail for 2 months later, you sit there and you go, damn it, and you put that out. But if someone's coaching you and drawing in a strength-based way as well and saying, here's some things you need to work on. Let's focus on speeding. Let's focus on harsh braking. Let's grow you and work together. And the reason I've got that bingo one just sitting down there is there's a webinar we did with Bingo Industries a while back. And they use all this footage and camera thing, not for actually a big stick approach. And this is where the management feedback comes in really crucial. They use it for coaching and growing, and a lot of organizations will do it in that sort of way. A lot of ones I sort of liaise with, but it's how you make it resonate to the drivers. Is it around, and a lot of them will sit there and say, is it around the safe travel of those sort of vehicles? And I go back to the pilot we're doing with those young people. For us, it's a strength. We have a person, textbook example, who engages with them. If I try to have a conversation with young people, they'll be thinking I'm going to beat them around the head because I'm an older sort of person. Whereas we have someone she's got pink hair and she just engages with them effortlessly, and they want to actually have it, and so it's like a relationship in that sort of sense. So it really comes down to how do you engage your workforce and how does management do it in a strengths-based approach. And what I want to sit there and just highlight here is this is a case study we did with Vista Hire a while back, and this is just a tool. So going back to those other sort of points, if you put this in, it's a very, very expensive tool. And so they actually had this as a component, as a value add for all their sort of vehicles if you go and hire them when they go out there. Question I put to them is, well, have you noticed a difference in behavior between an organization that cares about the tool and doesn't care about the tool? And from an exposure point of view, they'd pass the data on to them around how the drivers are going. The organization with the light green just did not care at all, whereas the other one, they had all the systems and elements in place. And I can guarantee you, if speed is a problem before you start putting this technology in place, you don't need the technology to confirm this is a problem. It's going to make your problem worse. The question is going to be what's the elements that sit around it? How have you grown and brought the workers along on the journey? And then you can sit there and bring these technologies and tools in. You need the plan to put that in place instead of just going, once again, here I am, and you have all these sort of problems. And even just the basics of seat belts sitting in here, you can just see the number don't know if it shows in this one, but the seatbelt use was dramatically different. The one on the green, people always wore a seatbelt. The light green, I think it's like 1,600 times they never wore a seatbelt in this sort of period as well. So big differences, and it's just like a great little simple example. I'm pointing it all out. So I just thought I'd throw that as a bit of a seed at the moment. There's me if you want to reach out, and we have all these toolbox talks, which you can sort of draw on, because the other part I recommend is when you go on a road safety journey, you have the tools, you have the technology, but the other part is engage with your drivers, because this is all around how do you make the drivers as safe as possible? How do you engage in them with the conversation? You don't have to recreate the wheel. They're all sitting on here and you can draw on it. So there's some quick thoughts from me, Chris.
Thank you very much, Jerome. Look, I understand you've got a summer intern exploring what you call Q&As on topics relevant to today's webinar. What are they and how could we all assist?
Awesome. Well, what we've got, every year we'll put on some summer interns and they delve into a topic which some of our partners have raised and asked us. So this year I have this amazing intern. She's a data scientist, Mona. She'll be starting on Monday actually. And so I always assign them over. And the key thing with these Q&As is they dive on into the topic. They look at the published literature that sit around it. But the key part is then talking to organizations, understanding the different angles they approach it. So she's going to be looking at, well, where's the interlink between, I guess, the technology and privacy sit? Where do the thresholds sit? How does this relate to safety culture as well? So open up. If everyone wants to be part of it, certainly keen. She'll do interviews and discuss and go through and develop this sort of process. So, and Navman's always been a great supporter of these. So she'll be starting off with you pretty early next week, I'd say, Chris.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jerome. That was a great insight, and certainly some of the studies that you've undertaken over the past and demonstrated in that presentation are so very relevant in helping people understand what the theory is and what the reality looks like. So thank you. And Gavin, if I can introduce you, please.
Thanks, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. It's always tough going straight after Jerome. He's such a good presenter and manages to fit so much detail into such a compressed period of time. So it was a really great presentation. Thanks, Jerome. What I thought I might do is take a slightly different approach to my presentation. There's going to be a few slides I'm going to run you through, but I want to provide you with a strategic insight into the way road safety outcomes are being advanced across the country, some of the policy directions that governments are taking, and to leave you with a few key messages, because what I hope to do is, if we can take sort of a macro view of the world and take a look at what governments are doing across the country, how that's translating into action, it might give you some thought bubbles or ideas that you can take away and consider how you can take those away into your specific areas of expertise, your businesses, and so forth. In case you're not familiar with who TCA is, we're a national government body set up by Australia's road and transport agencies, including all the states and territories and the Commonwealth. And our role is pretty simple. It's to deliver assurance outcomes through the use of technology and data, and with a specific focus on achieving improved public outcomes. And in case you're wondering what that means, it's with a view to supporting governments and policymakers to achieve policy objectives like improved road safety outcomes, or it could be improved environmental outcomes or improved productivity outcomes of heavy vehicles. But it's the use of technology and data to underpin those policies and initiatives, which is where we play a key role. We are part of Austroads, and Austroads has been around a little bit longer than TCA has. So Austroads may resonate with you as a name that you're more familiar with. And we work very closely with the work that Austroads does, particularly around the road safety program that is manages programs and projects with Australia's road agencies. And our role is to support those programs within Austroads to advance improved public outcomes. One of our key roles, and I might go to the next slide, Chris, if we can. This tries to describe in a simple image the interactions that occur between government agencies in the top left-hand corner, TCA in the top right, operators and drivers of vehicles down the bottom right-hand corner, and critically, the providers in the bottom left, providers of technology and data, who are essential partners in this journey to improve road safety outcomes. This ecosystem that exists between these managed interactions are critical to underpin the delivery of technology and data programs, policies and initiatives which can improve outcomes for the community. TCA plays a key role in bringing these different actors within the ecosystem together. We also play a key role in approving technology providers to operate in this framework. Now, what do we mean by approving providers? It means that we set performance requirements that meet the objectives, the policy objectives of government, and we make sure that there's approval gates in place to make sure that they are functionally and technically capable of delivering the requirements that we seek. And you might know us in the sense of being a certifier of technology providers or an approver of specific kinds of hardware or devices. And so when you see Teletrack Navman talk about being TCA certified, it means that they've gone through a fairly rigorous process to meet the functional, technical and business requirements that government agencies are asking from them through TCA. Now, I just want to turn briefly to the National Road Safety Strategy, because if you're not familiar with it, it's probably worth having a look at it. And a key objective of this strategy is to work towards the goal of 0 deaths and no serious harm from road usage by the year 2050. That's a fairly ambitious goal, but I think it's a goal that unites us all. And if you compare where we are today, looking at the stats this morning, annually we average around 1,200 people each year being killed on Australia's roads, and with 40,000 suffering serious injury. So between now and 2050, we've got a lot of work to do as a country to achieve the objectives that are set in this strategy. One of the things that underpins this National Road Safety Strategy is this concept of a safe systems approach. And Jerome can talk about it far more eloquently than I. But just to give you some of the headline articles, because they're relevant to today's discussion, it consists of 3 key elements: safer roads, safer vehicles, and safer road use. And over the next few slides, I'm going to tap into each of them in different ways, because I want to give you some insights into where governments are going and how they're working with TCA and technology providers like Teletrack Navman to achieve those different elements of the safe systems approach. It's also a global priority, and I was just looking at our partners globally earlier in the week. And these are some recent contemporary publications that you'll find on the web. They're worth having a look at because they provide rich insights into where other regions are going. They also provide really rich insights into the use of technology and data to improve outcomes. And both Chris and Jerome have talked about the use of video imaging and cameras, which is a huge growth area globally to improve road safety. We're also seeing the emergence of artificial intelligence and machine learning, which I think is an extension of the kind of work that Teletrack Navman is already doing in this space. If we go to the next slide, Jerome, you provided a really useful segue for me during your presentation, and it goes to the heart of knowing what tools you're using, and tools in the sense of technology and data. Jerome talked about making sure you've got buy-in and organizational investment in the use of technology. That's absolutely critical. It goes without saying, it's so obvious that you almost forget to say it, but we see time and time again that people forget to follow through on their investments in technology. But what's also just as important is being able to understand why you're using it. Again, Jerome mentioned this, but understanding what tools you're using to deliver the outcomes you're chasing. Really important. Chris will appreciate, and Chris has already touched on this, the role of compliance and the role of interventions, whether it be from a regulatory compliance viewpoint or an internal OH&S procedural outcome, or it could be even sort of get you into the realm of industrial relations law and the treatment of staff and employees based on the data and the reports that you use from technology and data. Where I'm going to with this is we're seeing businesses and organisations make good decisions around technology and data with the right intentions and the right spirit. But it can too often fall down because of a lack of buy-in with the rest of the organisation. It can also occur because there's a lack of clarity or a lack of agreed understanding around what your objectives are. And if you don't have clarity around objectives, then you end up using the wrong tool for the wrong job. And this is really, really important. I can't stress this enough because we're seeing this occur more and more. And if there's one message I can leave you with today is you don't need to go to the school of hard knocks to learn these lessons because others are learning them for you. And what we're seeing is where there is a reliance on technology and data, then make sure you're using the right tool for the right job. Make sure you understand some critical elements around the performance of those tools, and make sure that they align with the objectives that you're chasing. So if I can give an example, because that all sounds very nice in theory, but let's put an example on the table. Jerome talked about his young drivers app as a coaching tool, as a way to improve a whole range of performance characteristics by people. Now, you wouldn't use that app for a compliance task, though. It wouldn't have the necessary levels of integrity or assurance that you might need to manage professional drivers driving heavy vehicles or high-risk vehicles, and where the use of that data could end up in the form of disciplinary action. I hope that kind of example provides a useful illustration, because we're just seeing, from TCO's viewpoint, a propensity for some employers to use technology and data a little bit too liberally and without fully thinking through, am I using the right tool for the right job? And it ends up in tears, despite best intentions. It can get messy, and it can get a little bit, it can get the lawyers involved, which is never much fun. All I'm suggesting here is make sure you've got that lineage between the right tool, the right outcome, and making sure you're using it in a safe and appropriate manner. I also want to just talk briefly in the last few moments around where governments are going with this as well, because we've talked a lot around the use of telematics and technology and data within businesses, within groups of individuals, within different driving cohorts, and that's terrific. For governments, though, this is somewhat challenging because there's lots of pockets of activity that are occurring out there on their road networks, but road agencies will tell us that they have very limited visibility into what those pockets of activity and data being collected is actually telling them about the performance of their road networks. And if I go back to the safe systems approach, one of the things that governments continue to chase are safer roads. And the question that challenges road agencies across the country and globally is, where do you invest your next dollar to get the best possible outcome in improved road safety from improved road design and road characteristics. So what we've been doing with road agencies over the last few years is working with leading providers like Teletrack Navman to share their data with TCA so that it can be aggregated and anonymised so that road agencies can have better visibility of what's happening on their road network. This is a pretty simple concept. All we're doing is bringing pockets of data that's already been collected, bring it into a big mixing bowl, putting it together, and providing improved insights into road agencies. And what this is doing is providing insights into what the safety signature of roads are. So the kinds of things you'll hear road agencies say to us is, wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be great if we knew across our road networks, not just where the crashes were occurring, but where there were particular, there was a high frequency of harsh braking or high G-force records being generated. This might tell us something about not the individual driver, but across a population of vehicles. It might tell us that there's a problem with the road itself that's leading to these kinds of driver responses. And what we're doing right now is working with Teletrack Navman and Australia's road agencies to look at ways in which we can collect different kinds of data, a broader suite of data from what we collect today, to provide even better insights into the safety signature of roads. And we've talked about digital imaging as a key enabler to provide these kinds of insights. And G-force readings is another key ingredient into what we're trying to achieve here. And just this year, we've done some preliminary work with main roads in Western Australia, which was illustrative as a means to demonstrate to stakeholders how we can collect different kinds of data from modern vehicles that can provide really rich insights and provide, a bit of a prelude to a broader program of work around how we can generate a safety signature for the country across our road networks. So I'm going to land on this particular point. 3 key messages to take away. Telematics and technology and data plays a really key role to improve road safety. It does tie into the National Road Safety Strategy, but if you're using it within your business, within your operations, just know the limitations of the system and make sure that it aligns with what you're trying to achieve and its intended use. Because if you've got that right, you've got a better chance of achieving buy-in across your organisation with drivers. One other thing that's really important, and we don't have time to talk about it today, but one of the key areas of work that's taking place with us and the National Transport Commission right now is how we can move to a structured and strategic long-term data sharing and consent mechanism within law that can provide protections for all parties who are involved in the collection, transmission and use of data. When we're talking about video imaging or data being collected from vehicles, we're talking about fairly intrusive kinds of data that's being collected, particularly around video imaging if it's capturing images of the driver in question. So we need to make sure that legally that the drivers are protected, the registered operators are protected, the technology providers in question are protected, and ultimately the users of that data are protected. And that means we've got to have really clear delineations around who's doing what, who has access to what data, and who has access to what data under what circumstances or control measures. Because this will also be a critical ingredient going forward as we move to a much bigger world of data collection in the transport space to provide comfort and assurance to everyone who's involved in using data to improve road safety outcomes. But for now, all I can suggest is if you are using technology and data in your business and your operations, make sure you've got clear consent mechanisms in place so that drivers and anyone who's involved understands what's going on. There's no secret, there's no secret arrangements, there's transparency, and everyone understands what data's been collected, why it's been collected, and where it might be used. And how it can't be used is just as important. And the final point is, yes, as we move from this world of collecting data at an individual level or a business level, government's also looking at saying, all right, what can we do at a governmental level to use that same data and making sure that it's aggregated and anonymised to improve road safety outcomes so that they can better understand what's happening on their road networks. So I've probably consumed all my time, Chris, and I'm going to leave it there. But thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Gavin. It's I think it's underestimated the work that the TCA does, and we in Australia are very fortunate to have an arbiter from a government arbiter in the TCA to help guide and inform industry on not only what is best practice with technology, but how to approve it, to ensure that we don't allow cowboys with nefarious intent into the industry, which can cause a great deal of confusion. So thank you very much, Gavin.
Pleasure.
Right, so from my perspective, as I alluded to in my introduction, I had a long history in uniform as a police officer dealing with investigating collision sites. When you do that for many years, some people become numb. What I found was that it was an overt tragedy that road trauma occurs because when the police get involved, it's our role to investigate who did what wrong. And in the vast majority of collisions, a person did something wrong. So therefore, it can be argued that the majority of collisions are preventable. So we needed to understand why they're preventable, how they can be prevented. So in that capacity as an investigator, I was always reactive to the collisions, and it's devastating. So after many years or decades, I moved into this space where I felt that through technology, we have the ability to leverage the technology in ways that can improve road safety. People often, and you saw Jerome's scale as to, 80% of people believe they are better than average as drivers. And I would say that's almost conservative, because in the workplace, especially where your role revolves around being mobile, very few people, even if you are aware that you're not a good driver, are ready to volunteer that information. So it creates a fairly dangerous scenario whereby we're putting people out on the roads to perform a function for remuneration without understanding their risk profile. What the WHS legislation does state is that an organisation must be proactive in the identification of all risks and then proactive in the mitigation of those risks. We know that the highest risk for the majority of workers is driving. It's 2/3 of workplace fatalities occur in or around a vehicle. So we know that driving poses a very, very elevated risk. But what are we doing to proactively manage or reduce that identified risk? Without telematics, it can be argued that the only way you have problem drivers are reactive. You either receive a phone call from a disgruntled member of the public to say, I saw a truck bearing your brand driving too fast or driving in an unsafe manner. They could receive a penalty infringement notice, or they could have a collision. The problem is they're all reactive, and the legislation requires that an organisation is proactive in the identification and the mitigation of those risks. And that goes back down to understanding why people drive in the manner that they do. There's conscious incompetence. That's where you're a poor driver, but you're not going to do anything about it. Subconscious incompetence, where you're not a good driver, but you don't really know that you're not good. Conscious competence is where I would love for all drivers to be. They know what they're doing and they know they're doing it right. And subconscious competence is probably the lesser of, the second best one. It's where people are driving pretty well, but they don't understand why. We've often heard someone say, I've been driving for 40 years and I've never had a collision, so I am safe. That really doesn't ring true. We need to understand why we think we are good drivers. Just because you don't speed, just because you've not had a collision, just because you've not had an infringement notice, does not necessarily mean you're a good driver. The reason learners represent the lowest proportion of road fatalities is often because they're being monitored by their supervisor at the time, their parent, their friend, their brother, their sister, whoever the case may be, but they're being monitored and coached in real time. But once we get our license, for a large proportion of the population, they don't receive any formal driver training post-licensing. So for people who learnt like I did in the 80s, there's been many, many decades in between the time I achieved my license and what I'm doing now. And things have changed, such as the types of vehicles we drive, their performance, the type of roads we drive on, how many people are sharing the roads with me, and people's level of understanding around what driving or driver safety means. So we have to understand the issue. You know, there are pressures placed upon fleet operators. There are pressures placed upon drivers to meet deadlines. There are organizational pressures, journey scheduling and routing. All of these pressures contribute to sometimes almost encouraging drivers to drive in a manner that is seen as unsafe, high-risk driving. Fortunately, most states in the country have adopted a chain of responsibility model whereby while a driver is ultimately responsible for his behaviours behind the wheel, now it's taking into consideration the bigger picture, understanding that where an organisation has encouraged an individual to drive illegally, either exceed their driving hours, drive fatigued, drive too fast, drive too far, those sorts of things, now the microscope is going to be applied to them equally as it will be the driver. As an example, if a driver is told, I need you to drive the next 600 kilometers in 5 hours, when you do the math, it doesn't actually work out. But where that can be substantiated that that employee has applied that pressure to that driver, now that forms a breach under chain of responsibility legislation. So every person who forms part of that logistical chain has a responsibility by law to ensure that they don't encourage or contribute to poor driving behaviours. Once we understand what the issues are, we're starting to look at the ways technology is helping us mitigate those identified risks. Just like the supervisor of the learner driver sat beside the driver, we now have cameras. And that's where this webinar is designed to help people understand what technologies are we looking at, how do they work. So if you look at the screen, there's a data terminal to the right, and on the left is one of our proprietary cameras. What you can't see on that image is that there's a forward-facing or outward-facing camera, and there is a driver-facing camera. Now, often that raises the anxiety of drivers, thinking, I've got a camera now trained on me. So, like Gavin alluded to, we need to ensure that everything we do is transparent. We don't want to go back to the dark old days, which unfortunately our industry received potentially unfair reputation for being Big Brother, clandestine, where we would, quietly install the telematics unit to get the dirt on the driver so that the management can dismiss that driver. Fortunately, those days are long gone. We need to be transparent and open, consultative with our entire fleet. Often the drivers are the last people to know what's going on, but it should be argued they should be the first people consulted. Understand that we're looking to put this technology into the vehicle to help you achieve the safest outcome and for us as an organisation to meet our compliance requirements. The camera there are settings depending on the comfort level of the organisation to train the camera on the driver around, you can switch the driver facing camera off, etc. We don't necessarily recommend that because what it does capture are some things that can help coach the driver in real time. So once again, like what Jerome was saying about getting the speeding ticket in the mail 2 weeks after the event doesn't necessarily have the desired impact in reducing that driver's propensity to speed or do whatever breach they did. or having the mum or the dad or the driving instructor next to the learner, helping them understand the bigger picture from a safety perspective. What the camera does, it's not interested in whether you're going to stick your third digit up the nose to the knuckle. It's not interested in that at all. What it does do is it's a smart camera. It means it's got an algorithm, AI built into it, whereby if the driver starts to become distracted, and we've all seen this sometimes at the traffic lights, where you look in your mirror and all of a sudden the driver is looking down at their crutch. And we know they're not interested in the pattern of the fabric on the seat. They're usually texting or doing something with their phone. So they're being distracted. Sometimes if you're behind a vehicle, there's a green light, there's no reason it's not moving. The reason is it's because it's probably being distracted in some way. And what this camera does is it can help that driver understand if they're being distracted. It can send an audio signal through the camera to say, caution, you're being distracted. It has the ability to read street level speed signs. So not only speed signs, but street signs. So if your driver has a behavior such as rolling through stop signs, it can identify that that's a stop sign. I know the vehicle did not stop, so it'll sound an alert in the cab to train the driver in real time around what they're doing and how they can improve their driving. And all of this contributes towards the organizational goal of meeting your compliance requirements. Because like I said, where you needed to demonstrate proactivity in the mitigation of those identified risks, by installing a telematics product such as this, not only do you have all the intrinsic data that a telematics system comes with, but paired with the AI camera, now you're getting the real-time in-cabin feedback and coaching to the driver, which helps you demonstrate that you have met that threshold, that legal bar of managing the driver behavior in real time. This is not a tool to throw your drivers under the bus, but the way the legislation is written, it means that what your drivers do on the road can have a very real legal implication for people in the logistical chain within the organization. Where you manage those risks by use of the appropriate use and transparent use of technology, it not only overtly reduces the risk profile that your drivers possess, but it also comes with other benefits. We know that driving safer reduces fuel spend, reduces consumables such as tires, brakes, suspension components, and most importantly, reduces the incidence of collisions. Things like earlier, one of the presenters, I think Jerome, said seatbelts, where people aren't monitored, there was a much higher incidence of people not wearing seatbelts. And while we know that everybody knows that you have to wear a seatbelt and that it is the primary safety tool in the vehicle, yet many people didn't wear the seatbelt when they weren't being monitored. So once again, with the addition of a smart camera, it can identify if the seatbelt is not being worn and sound that alarm, because not everybody that doesn't wear a seatbelt is doing so with intention. They can sometimes forget. And where you have those triggers to help them understand to wear the seatbelt, not to use the phone, to stop at the stop signs, you may have missed a speed sign and be going too fast. And that way it can tell you, hey, you've got to slow down. That's where the benefit of how the camera works. So the camera reviews every minute of drive time. The video AI detects positive driving behavior and coaching events. So it's not only looking for bad habits, it's also identifying those positive habits. Events and driver scores are recorded and presented to fleet managers, and positive actions and coaching events can be shared with drivers on a mobile app. So there's a lot of fantastic new technology out there with this device that is capable of helping to coach your drivers without going through the expense of engaging driver trainers, etc. The real-time feedback part is the part that I love the best. When people talk about dash cams, domestic type dash cams just record static environment. However, with a smart AI camera such as this, it prevents incidents from occurring in real time with audio alerts for high-risk driving. Audio notifications can be triggered for severe events, including speeding, distracted driving, and following too closely. So if you look at the image, in the top corner, the AI, it categorizes all of the other moving vehicles, and it displays the following distance. And where that following distance, for instance, may be getting too close, it'll sound an alert. Now, this alert is for the purpose of highlighting and driving environment for which the driver can make it safer. So that's why we feel that with the addition of the video footage and the telematics system combined, it creates that system of car control and a safety management system whereby you're helping to ensure that your drivers come home at the end of each shift and go home to their families. So we're almost out of time. We've just got a little bit of time for some questions and answers. So I'm going to revert back to Billy. I'm not sure, I can't see if we've had any questions. Billy?
Hey, buddy. Yeah, we've got a couple here. Some really good ones, actually. What are some positive ways you can coach or train drivers using this video telematics that you've seen, Chris?
Sorry, can you say that again, Billy?
Yeah, sure. What are some of the positive ways you've seen people getting coached or trained using video telematics that you've seen in the field?
So in the field, the video telematics, it's really interesting that it's, what I like about it, it is not emotional. If you think about parents who, and I do have some question marks over having parents just without training be the trainers of their spouses. Often what we see with that is they get emotional and they transfer their bad behaviors to their children. And then their children, they articulate how to pass a test, and they don't really give them any real life skills about how to survive on the roads, how to not only not breach the law, but how to stay safe. And they are two different things. And therefore, because they are your child, you have the hierarchy system in place, you can allow emotions to get into it. Whereas with the video footage and the video coaching, it's AI. So there's no emotion involved. It's not going to scream at you. It doesn't matter whether you breach by 5 kilometers per hour or 50 kilometers per hour, the tone doesn't change. It just advises you that you're speeding. So, you are following too close. So it's pure information and removed or devoid of emotion.
Awesome. I think we've got one here for Gavin, best to sort of answer it. We've seen technology and telematics sort of being used with emergency vehicles and public transport. Is there any possibility of this hitting our industries at any point in the future to help with things like traffic and congestion and that kind of thing?
Turn myself off here. If I understand the question correctly, Billy, it's around alerting other road users to emergency vehicles on the road network. Is that the thrust of the question?
Yeah. The connection between telematics vehicles and infrastructure, really, yeah.
Yeah. So, yes, there's lots of talk about these things. Execution's always difficult. What we are seeing is a general move towards more real-time interactions between in-vehicle technologies like telematics and off-road technologies. So traditionally, telematics has been data being collected in the vehicle and then transmitted out of the vehicle. The next generation of telematics will be bi-directional. So there's an increasing move towards road agencies and emergency personnel and traffic management centres and the like, providing real-time feeds which can be accessed by telematics providers and to push that information to assist drivers in a real-time way. There's lots of avenues where that can take place. Be keen to hear the views of your audience here today around what they think the priority areas should be, because there are lots of opportunities. The challenge is, where do you start and what provides the greatest value to real users of the technology.
Excellent, thank you. Got one here for you, Jerome. What kind of road safety initiatives have you seen from your research that have come from other countries that you'd like to see kind of as a good example for implementation or to work with here in Australia? You're on mute as well, Jerome.
Sorry, good question. Got to have one. You're on mute one. So from other countries, I think that's a really good sort of question. I think we have a project called Clocks A, which is adapting from the UK. There's probably two angles where we're looking at it's a real systems-based approach. Because I think any tool that you apply all by itself, because there is no silver bullet, it's all around how you apply things all together. And we've heard that consistently from everyone. I think the Clocks A one is all around creating the safest vehicles, using for the heavy vehicle for major infrastructure projects, building the safest drivers, and training and making sure they've got competency for the task of driving through an urban environment, logistics and planning, making sure the truck's sticking to the route and driving in a safe way, and there's the evidence, and then educating the community on how to engage with them. And one other one I would just quickly point to is ATRI, so the American Trucking Research Institute, where they've basically got de-identified data pouring in over there, which is informing policy and infrastructure decisions on an evidence-based approach. So I think there's probably two powerful examples to draw on, which is relevant to what we're talking about today.
Excellent. I think we've got time for one more, and the rest of them we'll try to get to in response by email. So look out for that in the future. But what are some tips to integrating technology such as video telematics or this dash cam into a business's procedures so that you're making sure that they're used and used properly to get the most out of them? It's kind of open-ended to anyone who's willing to answer.
Yeah, look, I'll take a stab of that one, Billy. I think it's all about the planning. You've got to be prepared for the change management piece when implementing either a telematics or a telematics and video program. If you simply select a vendor and implement or install the devices without understanding how this is going to change. So from a workplace health and safety perspective, the majority of incidents occur when change is introduced, when an existing task is changed or a new task is introduced, and this product must be viewed in that manner. So to ensure that an organization gets the most bang for buck with the introduction of a telematics system and a video system, the planning is critical. And in planning, I'm talking about ensuring that all affected personnel are advised, communicated with, and consulted with. Talk about the consent piece with Gavin, letting them know that this is not a tool to be used for arbitrary purposes, but rather for compliance and safety purposes. If you set the agenda from the beginning and help people understand that collectively as an organization, we're introducing this for the purpose of making sure you get home safer, educating you about some of the potential risks that you are involved with, then I think the organization and the individual will collectively benefit. Having the appropriate policies in place, ensuring that all members of the organization, from the highest levels of the organization all the way to the newest member of the organization, are on the same page.
And one other thing I would sort of add to that as well is if you're going to put in, show how it can be used in a positive way as well. So to the point, you got to use it for coaching, for nudging, sharing these sort of stories and narratives in there, and letting the drivers know what they may actually see may actually differ for what they recall, because the human brain is very malleable and can be manipulated into other things by things that go along. So, and when an incident or something's happened, people might inform it and say, well, your fault, this sort of stuff. And it's a way of actually protecting the drivers. So they can say, this is actually the real world, because to Chris's point, it's black and white. There is no gray sitting in there. I mean, if you can use that and that sort of things, it's around protecting the drivers as well. If something does go wrong, and when they have the near misses, and they can see these sort of things that take place, and they can help them learn from those so that occur as well.
Anecdotally, it's really interesting you should say that, because anecdotal evidence suggests that for organizations that have implemented telematics and a camera system, overwhelmingly we're seeing that the cameras are corroborating the version of events as described by the fleet operator, by the driver. And you're right, versions of events can get muddied. Things in critical situations can become confusing. So not only having that backup, but also the corroborative evidence of the video footage to reinforce what the driver's been doing just is so valuable.
And you've got to remember, these guys are highly professional, and I think they underplay themselves that way. And I think it just talks because these guys are highly professional what they do. They got a high level of competency, and that's what we should aim for. So it's a way of actually helping protect them.
All right. Well, look, I think have we got any? We don't have any more, Billy?
We have a couple more, but we might not be able to get to it.
Okay, look, we'll probably get to them via email, but look, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our panelists, Jerome Carslake and Gavin Hill. Always a pleasure sharing a platform with you. The experience that you bring to these webinars, and surely our viewers will recognise this is not a job for these individuals. They live and breathe this for the benefit of making our roadways safer. So thank you very much for your participation today.
Thank you, Chris. Pleasure.
Pleasure.
Thank you. We'll terminate the webinar now. Only 3 minutes over, so not a bad effort.
Good job, mate. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.